Hi folks, thank you so much for coming out on a cold February night on short notice. Thank you to our folks at the Martha's Vineyard Preservation Trust for having us. Sam and I are so grateful that you all care so much about the island and its environment and the people that are here. Just very briefly, what we're going to do, our plan for today is to say welcome, to say thank you for being here and also for having us here, Nevada. We're going to talk about just who our organizations are, what the Katama Meadows development is, why Edgartown Great Pond and nitrogen matter and how they interact. Then we're going to go into the details of the development, what true community affordability looks like, and then it's all up to you. What do you guys want to talk about? What are your questions? What are your comments? Really, this is a community-based discussion. So thank you for being here. My name is Emily Reddington. I'm the Executive Director of Great Pond Foundation, but I'm really a biologist. I'm also someone who spends most of my time on the water. And for me, Edgartown Great Pond is where I've spent a good part of my life, and professionally I've been studying it for the last decade. So the point of Great Pond Foundation, we're interested in cultivating the resilience of our coastal pond ecosystems. What that means is we want to build up their resilience. If you think about it as an immune system, we want them to be stronger so that challenges, when they face them, they can respond and get healthy again. And that's our focus. The reason why we're concerned about the Katama Meadows development is it's going to add more nitrogen to the watershed and the pond can't take any more nitrogen. Sam?
Hi, everyone. I will echo those thanks. My name is Samantha Look. I'm the Executive Director of the Vineyard Conservation Society. And for those of you who don't know us, we are a broad umbrella environmental organization on the island. We work in education, advocacy, and legal defense in service to the land and water here in this very special place that we live. This development is incredibly concerning to us for the reasons that Emily has pointed to, and others as well that will come up during the course of this presentation. To Emily's point, I'm really curious to speak to all of you and hear your questions. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks as brief as possible, and Emily has some great science to share with us. But what we're going to start with is just, I'm not sure sort of where everybody's kind of baseline is for how much you know about this particular proposal. And so I'm just going to give you a really quick, and maybe I'll switch spots here, see if this magical slide situation works. It does. So if you haven't seen it already, this is the site plan for this proposal that we're discussing tonight. It's 54 acres, it's 52 potential units, although this top part up here is, maybe I went too low, sorry, this top part here is a 2.8 acre portion that is proposed to be gifted to the town of Edgartown, and the details remain to be determined as to what. So this is showing a potential mock-up for it as 14 lots. And then you have a band here. These are 12 lots that are intended for the quote unquote missing middle. And then down here, all this 26 market rate lots that can have 3,800 square foot houses plus garages with 400 square feet of living space. And the 3,800 square feet doesn't include a basement. They can be 5-bedroom. These are limited to 4-bedroom. And it is, yeah, that's just sort of the quick overview. This is to give you sort of some context where we're talking about in town. So the purple, this is currently 5 adjacent lots that are in common ownership. And so that development, that site plan we're just looking at is superimposed over the purple. But this, I think, picture gives a really good kind of flavor for what the development patterns are like in town. You can see the incredible density that surrounds it really on both sides, with the exception of what's happening here to the south as we get to the Great Pond. The other thing that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's just So I want to call your attention to kind of this band that goes through here, these bigger parcels, and how that is sort of a keystone right in the middle of that. That's just a close up, and I think I'll turn it to them.
Thanks, Sam. So again, we're going to start by talking about the pond, thinking of its health and getting into the atomic details and then more of the macroscopic picture, what's happening with the big things. But first, there's a lot of people that produce data that study the pond and also institutions. So many of the people in the room produce the slides that you'll see today, but also different institutions have been studying our ecosystems for a while. Particularly, you'll see a lot of data from the Martha's Vineyard Commission and Mass GIS because we want to tell you the whole story over a long time. What I'm going to focus on is why nitrogen is important, how nitrogen impacts ponds, where does the nitrogen come from that we're seeing. I want to talk a lot about eelgrass shellfish habitat. I want to convince you by the end of today that you want eelgrass shellfish habitat. Then I'll go into the watershed and wastewater, how those tie together. And something that's hard and but important is thinking about the environment in terms of money. How do you give a price to a living thing, a cost? So I'll talk about the environmental investments and the environmental costs. So, okay, back to biology, chemistry, the beginning. Why do we care about nitrogen? It's a building block of life. We are composed partially of nitrogen. The air is composed of nitrogen. You need nitrogen to have photosynthesis. If you get really technical, it's in there. We can ask Glenn about this, I know. But it's an important part of processes and ecosystems as well. And when an ecosystem is balanced, it can recycle nitrogen, move it from one form to another, from plants and animals and fungus and bacteria. And everything's happening in these webs that just keep moving around. And that's when you have ecosystems that look like this. The problem is when you get too much of one thing and the rest of it can't recycle, the ecosystem can't keep up with the inputs. So the big one we don't like to talk about, but is really important, is what's coming out of our houses. What happens is nature on its own can process the nitrogen that nature puts on it, but you put a lot of houses in a concentrated place, and there's more nitrogen than the ecosystem can keep up with on its own. That's why we're really glad there's science and technology where we can help mitigate the problem and make some thoughtful decisions. But this is where a lot of nitrogen comes from. And it's, we put out ammonium, it interacts with the ground and it turns into nitrate, and that's mostly what we find in ponds. Okay, bigger picture. We learned this week that AI can make cool figures. So we can thank Owen for being patient with AI and telling it what to do. That was our lesson of the week. So this is an imaginary pond, sort of like Edgartown Great Pond. What I want you to think about is where all the nitrogen is coming from, how it gets there, and how do you get it out. So we have individual homes where you're getting that nitrate coming into the pond. If people have old systems, just kind of holes dug in their ground and you're really close to the shore, you'll even see ammonium, not just nitrate coming into the pond. We've got farms in the watershed, so there's going to be agricultural runoff. You've got atmospheric deposition. We have less nitrogen coming from the air than we used to because of the Clean Air Act. This is great. This is reduced with time, but it's still something that comes into the ponds. We also have a wastewater treatment facility right on Edgartown Great Pond. If we knew what we know now, I think that would be a poor choice to put a wastewater treatment facility on a sensitive bound ecosystem, but we can't go back. We have to deal with what we have and figure out how to fix it from here. You also have urban runoff, so you've got fertilizers, sewage, stormwater, things that come out. How does the built up nitrogen get out? Sometimes the pond is cut. The ocean has low nitrogen. The pond has high nitrogen. So if you have tidal flushing, you can replace the high nitrogen pond with low nitrogen seawater. You also see the salinity increase. The problem is cuts are becoming less and less reliable. I'll show you some data on that later. It's like a Band-Aid approach to the situation. You have all these inputs, but one output. So you really have to deal with the inputs. So what happens when you have too much nitrogen? And you've got warm temperatures. You get algal blooms. This is a filamentous algal bloom. This is green algae. It's non-toxic. This is something we saw in 2019. If you're familiar with Edgartown Great Pond, this ways over here, somewhere over here. This was non-toxic, but it was a sign that there was too much nitrogen in the ecosystem. The thing we're really worried about are the toxic algal blooms. This is a cyanobacteria bloom. I think this was the one at Squibnocket Pond a few years back. Squibnocket got the really sad award this year for having the most concentrated cyanotoxins kind of ever measured on the island and possibly the Hamptons too. We thought there was a calculation error. It was order of magnitude more intense than we'd ever seen. So this is what we're trying to avoid. This is the real bad situation. These are just other examples of cyanobacteria blooms. Okay, this is what we want. This is this eelgrass shellfish habitat. This is a picture from Lyles Bay in Edgartown Great Pond in 2018. This is when conditions were ideal. This is what we want all the time. Okay, zooming in. Inside the eelgrass, there's lots of life. I'll talk to you more about it, but this is the typical oyster. You all have had it for dinner sometime. This is really important. In addition to being a source of food, it's part of our culture, and it's also a natural filter. Each oyster, when it's an adult, can filter 50 gallons of water a day. What they do is they accumulate nitrogen that's in the water. They use it to build their bodies, to build new oysters. And then when we harvest them out, we take it out of the pond. So that's another way to take nitrogen out. Oysters are our friend. If the pond is toxic and not healthy, you can't even add oysters in. Chilmark Pond has gotten so unhealthy because of fecal coliform that you can't use shellfish restoration as a mitigation strategy. So remember, Edgartown Great Pond has a lot of life in it. It has a lot of health. It has a lot of tools. We're trying to maintain those. And this is just zooming in. If you look at the inside of an oyster, you can also see the rib mussels. If you snorkel in eelgrass meadows, you'll see tons of life. It's pretty incredible. It's our favorite part of the job. All right, so forever, I want you to think about eelgrass shellfish habitat, because the only way you have eelgrass habitat is if your water quality has been good and steady for a long period of time. So that means you have optimal conditions. This means you have a healthy pond, and it's taking out nitrogen. It's sequestering carbon for hundreds of years. You want this because it helps the island and it helps the planet. Okay. Eelgrass does a ton of great things. And once it starts going, it cleans the pond further. But if you lose it, it's a big problem. Again, this is what we want. In 2020, Mass Department of Environmental Protection did their first ever aerial survey of the South Shore ponds. And Edgartown Great Pond had seagrass, eelgrass, and widgeongrass in almost every region of the pond except the deepest parts. So all the colored things, good. That means we have seagrass. What happened after the survey is devastating. So hundreds and hundreds of acres of eelgrass, the pond's not quite 900 acres, or most of them were lost in 2022. And I'll tell you why shortly. Again, eelgrass meadows used to look like this: clear water, lots of oysters, lots of things swimming around, juvenile finfish habitat. Then we started to have some stress. There's more phytoplankton blocking the light. Sometimes the cuts didn't work out. This is 23 after we lost our eelgrass. So we had eelgrass in the spring of 2022. By the fall, we could not find a single blade. We had the EPA out with us. Couldn't find any. We did a bunch of drop cameras. This is where you put a grid down with a GoPro, and it looked like a moonscape. Every single site we tried. But the good news is in 2025, we started seeing the eelgrass again. It's rebounding. That resilience, that ecosystem boost is coming back, and we want to protect this. This is what we're after, and this is such a good sign. Okay, so here's where we're going to get into the data. Don't worry, you don't have to read the numbers. What I want you to see is this dotted line right here. So what you have is from 1996 to 2025, you have nitrogen concentrations in Edgartown Great Pond. There are stations called sentinel stations, and they're used to make a target for health of the pond. You want things down below this line. Anytime you go above it, it's a problem. So in the 1990s, the wastewater treatment facility that's in Edgartown Great Pond's watershed was upgraded. So the nitrogen started coming down. And we have a gap in data, but it continues down, and the eelgrass started showing up around here. So if you follow this along, it's good news until you get to here. This is 2022 when we lost all the eelgrass. We had such an input of nitrogen that it killed off the eelgrass. So what happened that year, 2022? I don't know if you guys can think back. 2 years post-COVID, a lot of people had been on the island, so legacy nitrogen moves toward the pond. There were also poor cuts that year. So you have too much nitrogen, low salinity. not good flushing in the pond, and we lost a decade of restoration, hundreds of acres of eelgrass. The good news is the numbers have started to come back down, but we are so close to that line, to that tipping point, that any more nitrogen is too much nitrogen. We reached nitrogen capacity, our ability for this pond to handle it already. And this development is talking about adding more. Okay, so if you zoom in a little, you start at 2026, this is telling you the same thing, but you're just seeing the scatter plot of data. This red line is the trend. So you can see we went way up, we're starting to come back down, but in 2025, it wasn't a great year. We're not doing well enough. We have to mitigate more nitrogen to protect the eelgrass shellfish habitat. Again, we've got resilience, but it's still struggling. This is what we found in 2025. We snorkeled, again, best part of the job. And we saw eelgrass, but there's stuff growing on it. That means the light is blocked. It's not healthy. It's still struggling. We need to do better. But it's hope, because this eelgrass is what you need to keep the pond healthy. This is, again, looking at it. Too much stuff growing on it. It's struggling. But it's there. Okay. All these sources that are coming in, very few outlets. What I want to convince you, all this data, and we can give it to you in our ecosystem auditing report later. Anything in green is good. We're starting in 2017, going to 2025. Number of days the pond was open decreases in general as we get closer to now. That means the cuts aren't staying open long enough. The pond's not getting enough flushing. The salinity, average salinity is here. If it's orange, that means it's not ideal for eelgrass. Total nitrogen. You know it's kind of been up, down, up again. What we want to see is all green in this grid. We've got some work to do, but we also have hope. Okay, now we're going to get really complicated science. I'll do some arm waving. We did a lot of work with our colleagues at the MBL, and we tried to understand where the nitrogen is coming from. We know from two different methods, isotopes looking at phytoplankton assemblages in the community, in the pond, and also groundwater modeling. And that's these guys banging wellheads into the pond on very cold days and working very hard to get out water from around the pond. And that from two very different methods. We know that about 60% of the nitrogen comes from wastewater. That's domestic and livestock. We know about 23% comes from fertilizer, and 17 to 21% comes from atmospheric deposition. Those top two we can work with. We can work with wastewater, we can work with fertilizer. We're stuck with what comes with the air unless we make global changes. Okay, so this is the figure you might have seen in the Gazette. This is similar to Sam's figure, the development proposed subdivision we're talking about. Now we're going to kind of zoom out and look at this a little bit differently. Every blue line is a watershed. A watershed is like the vessel of land that collects water that eventually makes it to the pond. Edgartown Great Pond's watershed is here. This is Vineyard's watershed. We've got Eel Pond, Katama Bay, Tuxet, and everything else. All the parcels not connected to sewer are in the pink. All the parcels connected to sewer are in the red. So let's play a little math game. Here's the subdivision that's not developed, that's currently intact in the forest. Thank you, David. They want to add 52 dwellings worth of nitrogen. What we're going to tell you is, in this watershed map, only 20% of the nitrogen is coming from Edgartown Great Pond watershed. That means that other 80% is being pumped in, and although it's downgraded, about 95% of the nitrogen is removed before it's pumped into Edgartown Great Pond. It's still being pumped into Edgartown Great Pond. So think about it. That pond is struggling. It's right near that nitrogen limit, and people want to put more nitrogen in it. You could take off the pressure if you redirected that nitrogen to the watershed where it's supposed to come from. And the town of Edgartown is doing a comprehensive wastewater management plan, and all the nitrogen they're going to take from Senjikataket and Ocean Heights when they sewer that, they're going to bring it to the wastewater treatment facility and then pump it and discharge back the downgraded nitrogen effluent back. Because you can't import nitrogen from outside the watershed into a watershed. Mass DEP says that's illegal. But we're importing 80% of it right now to this pond, which is why the pond is struggling. Okay, here's our nitrogen figure again, 2022. We are so close to that line. Here's the eelgrass. We want to get back to 2018. Resilience and recovery stage, that's where the pond is right now. But we've had decades of nitrogen input coming into Edgartown Great Pond. Even if we stopped all nitrogen now, the watershed legacy nitrogen would still be coming towards the pond. So we have a lot of work to do to stop or mitigate future development. We have to deal with that nitrogen. We have to deal with existing nitrogen, and we have to deal with the excess nitrogen that's accumulated in the pond. So management and mitigation investments. The town of Edgartown invested quite a bit of money, I don't know the number, in the upgrades in the 1990s, and that had huge impact on the health of Edgartown Great Pond. Town has been cutting the pond to the short-term flushing of the nitrogen. The town's also been dredging. Great Pond Foundation helped a little bit with that. The shellfish restoration's gone on by the shellfish in the pond, and our team's done ecosystem monitoring. But there's been decades of the development. I think we looked at the stats before this meeting, and there's been about a 35% increase in development in the watershed from 2000 to 2023. Owen can correct me if I got that wrong. Okay, thanks, Owen. And we also have warming temperatures to contend with. So if you want to put numbers on this, I know our investment at GPF is about $2 million over a decade. I know the shellfish restoration, the Colbert Foundation was supporting it for MD Shellfish Group at $30,000 to $50,000 annually for over a decade. And our ecosystem monitoring costs about $150,000 to $500,000 a year. And we've been doing that for the last decade. So those are all environmental investments in this pond. There's also the fact that the town of Edgartown is doing their comprehensive wastewater management plan. And they right now, to zero ocean heights and to upgrade the wastewater treatment facility, need to invest $200 million in the next decade. That's going to be taxpayer dollars. That's going to be town dollars. And hopefully there's going to be state funding. The finances haven't been worked out. But $200 million is a lot of dollars. Then think about the costs. So commercial and recreational shellfish harvest, if we're just talking about oysters and clams, that can be annually anywhere from 20 to 75% of the town's harvest of those species, just in Edgartown Great Pond. So if you had an unhealthy, toxic pond, you can't have shellfish. You will lose that important source of revenue for the families that are either fishing recreationally or commercially. Real estate value, just the properties lining the pond, are about $957 million. Or approximately $1 billion. I know we've got low tax rates in Edgartown, but if you have a toxic pond, what happens to those property values? What happens to the taxes coming to the town to do the mitigation? There's also tourism, there's recreation, sailing on a pond. You're not going to sail with your family on a toxic pond. So my question is this development worth the cost?
Well, to pick up where Emily left the question, thinking back to, and I might actually take you guys through a little tour of the slides really fast to get back to that site plan. Just to explain the categories of housing, so that you can understand how this proposal, when a project goes to the Martha's Vineyard Commission, the idea is that the commission is tasked with weighing the benefits and detriments of a project. And they are meant to be looking very sort of globally at the project, how it impacts the economics, the environment, housing, all sorts of indices for the community. And so we've heard great information from Emily about the environment. So what is this proposing to sort of try to balance those scales? And so when this project has a long story in its various iterations that we do not have time for tonight. This is its 5th iteration. It has had 2 prior DRI numbers. Its 3rd DRI attempt at the commission. The first one was denied, the middle one was withdrawn, and this is what's before us currently. When it first came, it was just luxury lots. There was no portability really included with it. Without going through all of the various stages, what is proposed now is these 26 lots that, as I mentioned before, are market rate. The missing middle is intended to be available for folks making 250% of AMI. And for our area, that's right around $370,000 a year for a family of 4. So That's a pretty high-end missing middle. And in my opinion. And the lot would be exact sale price of $295,000. But we wanted to sort of like chase that out and see, okay, what does that mean? Okay, building on the island right now is astronomical. And so we talked to a number of different builders and found prices between the very low end was about $600 a square foot. I mean, up to the sky's the limit, but sort of, we heard 600 to 700, we heard 800 to 1,000, we heard 1,000 to 1,500. So we priced it at 600 to be as conservative as possible. And assuming like a 1,500 square foot house, $295 purchase price for your land, 1,500 square foot house, which is by most people's standards these days quite modest. The average house size is around in the 2,000, 2,300 square feet in this town and some of the other towns in the Vineyard. That is like $1.2 million for you to be inside your house by the time you've bought the land and built your house. And so leave that to each of us to decide whether or not we think that's affordable, but that's just, I think, really important. The other thing that is striking to us is the fact that there's not a lot of detail about what generation 2 will be like for these properties. And there's, to the best of our knowledge at this point, no constraint on what could be built on those properties. So if you hit the 250 AMI and you have the resources to put a $2 million house on that or a $3 million house on that, we're now looking at 3.3. And so how does that even remain available to the high end of the missing middle when it gets sold in its next generation? And so those may be details that the developer chooses to flesh out and answer, but for the moment, it doesn't seem like it's a real sustainable model. And even I would say on day one, it's not particularly addressing the problem that we have on the island. And then this piece at the top, which is the 2.8 acre gift to the town, there's no guarantee what will become of that. It's shown with 14 lots on it, but it's unfunded. There's no, the developer is not paying to do anything there. They're not building any housing. They're just gifting the acreage. They're just potentially gifting the acreage to the town, depending on how this proposal fares. And so looking at Edgartown's master plan, looking at their draft housing production plan, acreage is not the limiting factor for having affordable housing in this town. There's other lots that have been identified by the housing production plan to produce affordable housing. This lot was asked whether it wanted to be included in the housing production plan. It was denied. It declined to include it. And so it doesn't appear to us, when we're holding one side of the balance with all of what Emily just said, and that was just addressing the pond. There's many other aspects to our environment and the quality of life and other aspects to the vineyard on one side, and on the other side of the scale, these are supposed to be the two things that are balancing out the cost of all of that. We're deeply concerned about how that works out. So 52 lots on 54 acres. I was curious what the sort of like a normal or sort of the last few years of building permits are in the town of Edgartown. Assuming this was built over 3 years, maybe more, maybe that's too fast, but that's about 17 houses a year. That's about a third of Edgartown's current total building permits in a given year. So that's adding a third again as many. Granted, it may be a longer arc than that, but it's not an insignificant bump to the amount of developable building lots in town. It is in the town's master plan. The town has spoken to the fact that they priorities, I'm just going to read the language, but priorities for developing affordable housing are close to services. There's not sidewalks here, there's not easy transportation, public transportation here, but in the 2024 master plan, the town already owns numerous properties that could be developed for municipal workforce housing to both entice and retain needed staff. The town should investigate which town-owned properties could be developed, which it has since done, and has these other pieces identified. And sorry, that's not even the quote that speaks to the fact that the goal is to keep this kind of housing closer to services. Also, this area is identified in the island plan as an area of the town that wants to be lightly settled, and this is anything but that. Right next to this, off to the sort of northeast here, is Mashakit Commons. So we already have 40 units of housing that's just been built here. And just to read sort of the list of things that the Vineyard either is looking at having come before us or is already okayed. There's Mashakit Commons with 40 units. There's Green Villa in Edgartown with 100 units. That's sort of still in flux. Takanash Knoll with 60 units, also in a flux. Navigator Home with 48 units. And that's just the sort of like top line, very dense multifamily housing. That does not account at all for the regular single family homes that are being built every year in various towns. And I'm going to take us back through, quick scroll. To Emily's point about the various things that are being, the community is investing in planning. She was talking about dredging and mitigation to the health of the pond. The other ways that we're trying to work to make sure that we're on track with a sustainable future for the island are these various plans that we've done along the way. The island plan is the big one that was done in 2009 that people point to very often. We didn't even consider that because it's gotten a bit, it's a little bit dated, but if you look at that and the indices in that island plan, the goals from that island plan, which took a ton of work and involved a ton of stakeholders across the community who put so much care and thought into that document. This development offends sort of top to bottom almost the things that are pointed out in the island plan. More recently, we have the climate action plan. For all of the reasons that Emily spoke to, this proposal really stands to hurt Edgartown Great Pond and threaten its resiliency. We're looking at days ahead with a changing climate where rising temperature, unpredictable weather are going to put stresses on all of our ecosystems such that we don't even know yet. And adding this extra layer of stress to it is not in its best interest. An outgrowth from the climate action plan was in 2024, there was new vegetation mapping done for the vineyard. And when that mapping was done, there was a conservation summit held that the Martha's Vineyard Commission convened. And there were dozens of us in that room at the commission, all tasked with seeing these new maps and then with various goals in mind, identifying where the priority areas would be for conservation going forward for the island. From that process, so this is the outcome of that process. Everything with blue is sort of the highest priority spots identified by this large group of folks based on this mapping and habitat connectivity and the type of habitat that was in the area. There are 12 of those blue dots. This is the dot that the area that we're talking about. So it's the connectivity between Turkey Lynn Cove and Sweetened Water. And to look at that a different way, sorry, this is kind of like a wild color. If you can believe it, we actually removed some colors from this one. There's so much information. The commission is amazing. Shout out to Chris Seidel, if you don't know her, is an amazing cartographer and amazing translator of data into maps. But what you're seeing here, the blue is where that, as zooming in on those dots that I was talking about a moment ago. This band here, orange, yellow, yellow, orange, that is where this proposed subdivision is. To understand what we're seeing as far as colors, the red is developed. That's what's already, its fate is sealed. Green is permanently conserved. Orange is what the commission terms potentially available, which means that it has maybe some level of development on it, but could be further subdivided potentially. And then yellow is considered totally available. So that's something that has all of its development potential in front of it. And so this, I think, is, if you can sort of calm down your eye with all the color, if you look at, here's Wilson's Landing, if you look at the conservation that's happening down here, through this band, this is sort of what I pointed out in the beginning, getting up here to the Sweetened Water area and this wetland, that's the connectivity that was considered such a priority to protect. And I just think it's One of the things that I really see and feel passionately about from being in these various meetings and various forums is how I really desire for our community to take the hard work that we do in one room and bring it into the decision-making of another room. That's why we do that work. And so whether it's the island plan or the climate action plan or this priority mapping, like we have all of these great thinkers that have put a lot of time and energy and dollars. That was state money that funded this work, that could have gone to other climate resiliency projects, but here this was deemed a priority. Take all of that good work and let it inform the decisions that are in front of us. And so from all of those indices, this is just very concerning to us that we're seeing this kind of density in this particular location. This was taken from the Edgartown master plan, sort of a survey, it's in progress survey. So the community was surveyed while that document was being finished. And this is this circle I want to call attention to. So down here, the community was asked, which challenge is the most important for Edgartown's plan to focus on? And 63% is overdevelopment. What is also included, in case you guys can't read from that in the back, loss of woods and fields got 3%, septic pollution got 16%, housing affordability got 16%, and traffic congestion got 3%. And so I would argue that 63, 3, 16, and an additional 3 are all exacerbated by this development. Up here, there was a very dedicated question, how important is affordable housing to you? And that was 52%. And I think that most of us, in this case, I guess 52%, are concerned about housing. And this is not, the title of this talk today was Choose Both. This is not a question of whether our community can afford to have affordable housing or an intact environment. It's a choice of how do we balance those two absolutely critical needs for our community against all of the other noise that is pushing on this beloved place. And if you can think back, because I'm not going to scroll us back through those slides to that site plan, and think about the percentage of that site plan that was dedicated to luxury housing versus the percentage that was kind of crushed up into the corner that was meant for affordability for the community. And then you think about the details behind that affordability for the community and whether and the fact that there's no actual housing coming out of that plan. What are we getting? And what are we standing to lose? To Emily's question. I really want to hear from you guys, but the last thing that I'm going to say is we're kind of at a moment on the Vineyard. These are sort of the numbers that the organization that I work for likes. I don't know if the word is likes because they make me sad, but that we frequently trot out to try to make our point is kind of where we're at and what we have for available land and the choices in front of us. And right now we'll start with the fabulous news, which is that about 43% of the island is in conservation. Some of that is regulatory conservation, so those are like wetlands protection type conservation. So that is subject to those regulations staying the same. But that being said, about just less than 25,000 acres is in conservation, and we can give ourselves a huge pat on the back for the hard work of everyone who got us to that place. The more complicated part of that story is that about 13, almost 14,000 acres is in that orange and yellow, if you remember that super colorful map of the available or potentially available land. So that the fate of that acreage remains to be seen. And based on historical trends, 80% of that would be developed and 20% of that would be conserved. So that's what we're looking at for that not quite 14,000 acres. If you do the math, when you move through the Vineyard, as we experience the island today, that 14,000 acres that's undeveloped, we experience it as open space. We don't, I mean, some of us know when we're driving around, oh, that's Sheriff's Meadows, that's the land bank. But for the most part, we just experience a sense of rural, a sense of spaciousness, places to sort of like soothe our souls, go for walks, just driving our cars to go to the mail and getting to go past a forest. A quarter of what we experience is that 14 or 13.6 that is up for grabs, that could be developed, and that, as historical trends show, would be 80% developed. That 80-20, that does not even take into consideration the fact that we need some of this dense housing to have affordability and to have the community. And so let's use that density wisely in the right locations where it's not potentially, or I would argue, not even potentially, where it is going to terribly harm an incredibly sacred resource for this island. Edgartown has such a connection to the water. That pond is such an important part, as Emily demonstrated so well, of the culture of the town, of the economy of the town. It just seems outrageous to potentially endanger it. I'll just leave it there so that we can hear from you guys, but thank you all. Questions?
Okay, I have one. I asked this question in the hearing and you get answered. What you made a tremendous case for the importance of nitrogen in the pond, but what's the delta? What is the effect of this development going to be on the nitrogen level in the pond? Is there a number?
Hard to tell because the details aren't fleshed out entirely. I can bore you with some stats from it. So the developers have secured capacity to hook up to the current existing wastewater treatment facility. So that will downgrade their wastewater effluent upwards of 90%. So that's good. We're reducing how much nitrogen could go into the groundwater, but it's not dealing with phosphorus. That's also a problem. It's not dealing with fertilizer. It's not dealing with nitrogen runoff from many paved surfaces. So it's really hard to say how much nitrogen it will add, but it will add quite a bit, and there's already too much. So I can't answer your question specifically, but there's a lot of ways that it will add. Also, you currently have intact forest right there that is absorbing nitrogen. The combination of plants and fungus and bacteria in the soil, they are taking nitrogen and using it to grow. They're also sequestering carbon. When you clear cut an area, you release nitrogen into the groundwater and you stop that ecosystem from transforming harmful nitrogen into harmless nitrogen. Harmless nitrogen is in the air. It's a normal thing. We need it. What we don't want is the stuff going into the groundwater that pollutes nature.
The 14,000 acres, how many houses projected?
The projection is about another 11,000, and we have about 19,000 right now. So it's incredibly significant. Yeah. And to be honest, I don't think those numbers take into account the ADU change that we now have. So, and are you guys all familiar with when I say ADU?
Oh, yes.
The accessory dwelling unit. So that we basically effectively potentially sort of double density. It's more complicated than that, but that's sort of a broad stroke. But it's incredibly significant.
Something that's really important too, because when we're calculating nitrogen, ADUs, houses, bedrooms, we go by the number of bedrooms. What are actually people doing in their bedrooms? Like, do you have bunk beds? Oh, that's not that much. I mean, do you have bunk beds? Do you have a high density usage of that house? Are we actually counting nitrogen correctly? Yeah, I'm getting off track here. There's also sometimes, because housing is so expensive, you have 3 families in a single home. So when we're talking about impacts in housing, there's also the usage of the housing that goes way beyond what we even realize.
There's also, this is going to probably lead us down a complicated road, but I will say it simply and we can go from there. Growth begets growth. And so as we build these houses in this super dense way, and a lot of that density is, again, homes that are market rate, that maybe short-term rentals, they're going to need landscapers and trash service, and are they going to have swimming pools? And so it's just, we sort of are chasing our tail a little bit. Anyway.
That was a great presentation.
And Sam, you covered, I think, all of it about, the housing component, except you were kind on that one. You know, that 2 acres, that is just, they're giving Edgartown Park. How great is that? It's nothing. It's just a little more open space. So I just wanted to say, having been involved with this, as you said, there were 3 DRIs. They've gotten progressively worse. The first one was denied. I was a witness for the commission when it went to court, and it got, so you can't be right. Yeah, and it's the commission was confirmed, but one of the things that really strikes me about this, the most compelling thing, is that the last time a development was approved on Martha's Vineyard with as many as 26 market rate houses, and this has 20 more, was in the 1980s. It was Deer Run and full of water. And we're talking 40 years ago. So this, if it were approved, would take us back 40 years. And we obviously need to go forward on that. So this is one that I think it's really important to make sure that the commission turns it down. They turned down unanimously Don Aromas. This is worse. But Edgartown did not, the town of Edgartown did not support Don Aromas. The town of Edgartown does support this from my understanding. So people really have to speak up. Wow.
Thanks for highlighting, John. That's really important. We need your voices either at the hearing on February 12th or in addition to in writing. Thanks to those in the room who've already sent letters, the Zoom room, this room. But the DRI process means that the community has a voice. We have the opportunity to weigh in. That's why we're here tonight, because your voices matter. We can speak from our organizations and from ourselves, but we need to collectively speak up if we value this land and water. And there's, I think, instructions on our website, Great Pond Foundation, about how to write in. I don't know if BCS has directions on in your newsletters you send out in your action alerts. But if you need any help or guidance, email us, but also look at our websites. But we need your help.
And the commission has really spoken to the fact that it wants to hear. I mean, this is a DRI, it's a development of regional impact. So by very definition, the fact that it's undergoing this review means that it is relevant to every single one of us here on the island. So every single voice matters. That being said, the commission has indicated that they really want to know how Edgartown feels about this. And as was just said, Edgartown wants this. Edgartown has some loud voices that seem to be saying yes to this. And but Edgartown is a much bigger community than just those voices, but the other voices need to be heard so that the commission understands a broader spectrum of what the town wants for its future. And it is, as Emily said, we can help. And it can be like a few sentences. Just being in that room is the absolute most impactful, and being willing to say something, being at the commission on the 12th, being on Zoom and being willing to say a few sentences is the next best. Writing is also great. But the commission has, John sort of mentioned it, they have been through the ringer already on this to some degree. And they need to feel the support of the community behind them.
Karen, second question.
How much impact does it have that the select board has said yay to this in terms of how the commission will react to we in Edgartown?
I think it's only speculative for us to answer that because only the commissioners know what that means to them. My hunch is that it means quite a lot, and that's why other voices from Edgartown need to add themselves to the conversation, because as Emily said, this is what this is. This is a forum for all of us to help put our stamp on where we want the islands to be a decade.
And can I suggest perhaps not only writing to the commission, but maybe we also might think about, I don't know if it's useful, writing to our select board and thinking whatever our feelings are.
I think it's a great suggestion.
I think that's really important as well, because I don't know if that's in stone. You know, we certainly have a new commissioner, a young person who I was shocked to see that it went, all three of them said yay to this. I think they were bamboozled by that quote affordable housing, and they need the clarity that you just gave me and us, you know, because I didn't exactly understand it. That's what we need to let them, or remind them of, with a lot of strong voices.
Absolutely agree.
It's a really good point. And Edgartown controls a lot of the pieces here. They are the ones managing the wastewater treatment facility. They are the ones deciding when the cut happens. They're the ones in charge of a lot of things. And so Edgartown has a lot of power, but Edgartown residents as well have a voice, and we really need to use it here. And I know Julie and I were both in the room when the selectmen were talking about this proposal, and they were making it sound like a done deal, but everybody in the room was saying, wait a minute, we're really concerned. And so it was a kind of strange interaction between community and select board. But I think you're right, Karen, we need to speak up in that way as well.
Why were they so supportive of it? Why?
It's the affordable housing piece of
It's not affordable housing.
It isn't, I agree with you, but I think.
That's what they say, though.
That's it, right?
Lost
You were in the room, I wasn't there, but that's what it's about, they think.
Those lots aren't affordable.
Yeah, I think we,
And the other
And
lots are just
really-
open lots that
Yes,
folks
that
would have to
would-
purchase and build
We
them
need to make.
on their own.
there's
All of
a
them.
big cost associated with the gift.
Well, it doesn't, go towards the 10% affordable housing we're supposed to have this town. We're at 3
won't
right
have
now. None of that will go towards that 10% requirement.
Right.
So that means we're more open to developers.
It doesn't meet the critical need, and this also sets a precedent. If this were approved, what happens when the next development that's just a little smaller comes up? This huge thing, what we did 40 years ago is not denied. How would we ever stop anything else? David had a question.
Well, just 2.1. Sam, you mentioned it, but you didn't lead off with it, which is that there are limits that need to be met. And anything you produce generates more need. That just leads to a cascading set of effects. So I think that's a really important point to start with, that we already are in a position where the build out that has occurred has generated a need for other people who don't have a place to live on the island to service what they're doing. If we build more, we'll just generate more of that activity. So the second point is, can you point to opportunity for addressing the current need that don't involve destroying important habitat? So I think if you can just point to alternatives that truly address the affordability issue for the folks who are already out there servicing everything that we all do. Seems to me that provides a lot of support for the argument of stopping this particular plan.
John, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I would just say a couple of things about that. First of all, Sam, you mentioned 4 big affordable housing developments, 3 of which are done deals. Coming right on the heels of Katama Meadows is Green Villa with 100 and something units of something, and that something is not very good. That is another one that will need a close look, but we have 19,000 buildings, as Sam said. all of those buildings can be repurposed from short-term rentals to year-round housing. Through many mechanisms, one of which is the transfer fee that we desperately need. So we don't have to be sold affordable housing, which we desperately need. I've worked hard on that for a long time, but some of these proposals are just not helpful, useful, valuable, and beneficial. So I think it's really important to look at every affordable housing proposal on its merits.
Yeah,
and I think that's exactly what I'm getting at. And to point to these obvious solutions that are already out.
Julia might have an answer as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have a housing production plan. Each town has one. Ours hasn't been fully adopted yet, although the planning board has adopted it. And it lists out many sites where infill housing could happen. And it also recommends affordable housing on a 5-acre site that's at the water plant. And there are 6 building lots at the sewer treatment plant. I mean, there's a lot in there. And there's no reason why the Affordable Housing Trust and the Affordable Housing Committee can't focus on those properties that are listed in our housing.
Well, I think that's exactly what's needed, is to make that front and center so that that the pseudo affordability option that's being provided by this new development gets undercut by the alternative, which is already out there.
Right.
The other thing that I found amazing at the opening to this most recent DRI, to the hearing, which was 2 weeks ago, anyway, recently, was that we were all there gathered speaking for a while. And at the beginning, there was the staff presentation, the NBC staff presentation, and it went through various things, and sort of all of the standard information that gets exchanged at the beginning of a new DRI. But then when the hearing opened and there was like dialogue between the applicant and the commissioners, I would say almost all of that dialogue was about the affordability component to this project. And to the commission's credit, they want to know the details. So kudos to them for asking the questions. But I walked away from that experience and being like, this is amazing. This is like a magician's trick. Nobody's talking about the 26 market rate loss. All we're talking about is what's happening up in this corner. And it's just sort of like the rest is sort of being forgotten. And I think it's really important to remember that this project came as a luxury subdivision. It is now trying to like nick at its edges while maintaining its profitability to make it palatable to the community. And we shouldn't accept that. And it's
Exactly. Is anyone else interested in the property? Any of the other land holding organizations?
Not yet.
Go back to your
Not
multicolored mask for a minute. You know, the one with all the bright colors on. And I know, if I share a little of it after.
The right screen, if you pick the.
Oh, I see it.
Maybe.
Then click here.
Yeah, not good.
There it is.
So boring.
It shows the yellow and the orange. There you go. You see the corridor that runs up to Sweetened Water from there? That's a really nice corridor. And I think Luann identified that. And
That's where your otters are gonna run around into.
That's where otters
are
are wildlife. That's one of the arguments I'll make in my letter. This is a really important habitat corridor. Yeah, if you fill that in, you're cutting them off. And we don't have a lot of corridors like that on the St. Island anymore.
No, it's the only path between Sandra-Kataka and Edgartown Great
Yeah.
Pond.
Yeah.
There's so much wildlife that uses that area.
A lot of them are very secretive and they don't want to be near housing development, especially otter. And otter. Okay. That's a really important block of color there.
Yeah, it is. I think the other thing that we really haven't talked about much maybe goes in another direction, but again, remembering that list of all those big developments that I rattled off that John referenced, all of that housing is kind of hitting the vineyard more or less at a moment in time. You know, this is still under review, Greenville is still under review, rest of it is already developed. And if these are approved, it'll be quick to follow. We don't, I would say, adequately know what that means to our infrastructure here. And so today we've been really focused on what are the impacts to those 5 parcels, and it's Great Pond that's nearby. But all of the spill out from that development into the island as a whole, and then the environmental degradation and character of life changes that flow from that, I think is profound. Like, what does this mean? When do we need a 2-lane rotary? When do we need proper traffic lights? When, like, it's, you know, who's getting doctors? Who, we already don't have vets and dentists and doctors, and I don't, like, we can sort of all of the whether it's like hard infrastructure or it's services, sort of essential services for the community. Anyway, there are other implications that get beyond the scope of the
And that's the
immediate
danger in
neighborhood.
all of it, because they just pick away at it. You look at the projects one at a time, in isolation, right? Without really considering what the overall impact, the entire island are.
I wonder if we have any questions from the Zoom room. There's a few guests that are attending virtually. No questions?
Well, thank you all very much. Please share this information. Kind of think of the easiest way for you to get either of our websites. You'll be able to get information from. The Martha's Vineyard Commission has a little bit of a tricky website, but if you go right to their calendar, actually, next Thursday is the hearing. If you click on the hearing agenda, it will give you a link right to the DRI. And in there is site plans and staff reports, and you can read other people's correspondence if you'd really like to write, but you're looking for inspiration. And both of our organizations are incredibly concerned and very, very happy to devote a lot of resources to helping the community weigh this. So please feel free to email or call or stop by our offices.
What time is that on the 12th?
6:30.
So-
Yeah.
And if you want to speak on the 12th, you should let Lucy Morrison know ahead of time, because she keeps a list of who's already, registered to speak. So,
And when you speak, you're going to be heard. They may or may not read your letter. We really hope they read them all. But speaking is meaningful.
Is PowerPoint available?
We could make it available. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Oh, wow.